Dianna. Um, Hi, welcome everyone to this month's STS Information Literacy discussion. This is the Actual Margaret Phillips, and I'm a member of the STS Information Literacy Committee and an assistant professor of engineering and library science at Purdue University. And I'll serve as the moderator for today's chat. So for those of you who are new with us and you haven't maybe participated in one of our discussions before, we do hold these sessions several times a year on a variety of STEM information literacy topics of interest to librarians. And they're always announced at least 10 days prior to the event on the STS listserv. All of the sessions are recorded and archived, and past recordings, they're available at this link. I'm going to share this with you in the chat box. You can get to them there. And our chat today, as well as the presenter slides, will be archived at this link if you'd like to access it at a future date. And so at this time, it's my pleasure to introduce our discussion leader today, Dianna Morganti. Dianna is a research, instruction, and outreach librarian at Texas State University. A little more about Dianna. After 12 years in public library administration, she embarked on her lifelong dream of becoming a STEM librarian. She has dabbled in graduate math classes for some time and just couldn't resist applying for the math and computer science librarian position that opened up at a nearby university. She's been happily learning and growing in academic STEM librarianship for 3.5 years now at Texas State University, and she's found a passion and interest in the intersection of information literacy and scholarly communication. Which leads us to the title of today's discussion, Scholarly Communication and Predatory Publishing for Undergrads. So in just a moment, I'm going to hand things over to Dianna, and she's going to give us a short talk to kind of set the stage for our discussion. And if you have questions or comments at any time, feel free to enter them into the chat box. And if you're still just joining us, as Gina mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we're having a technical glitch today and everyone has entered the room as Margaret Phillips. So if you want to be identified, please put your name in the chat box when you're asking a question or making a comment so we can see who's making that comment or asking that question. All right, so at this time, I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to you, Dianna.
Okay, thank you so much. So I'm going to go backwards in a little bit, and I'm going to first dive into the intersections. So as Margaret said in the introduction, my passion and interest is in the intersections of scholarly communication and information literacy. And so the first thing I want to talk about is maybe the last part of what most people talk about, and that is kind of the scholarship around this. And then I'm going to work backwards and talk about my example, my case study. So in the ACRL intersections of scholarly communication and information literacy, the working group found 3 intersections. And the first one was about how the economics of scholarly publishing are absolutely affecting all of our students. And in fact, this is the main intersection for my presentation. And I sum it up as gone are the days of Google bad, library good. Students have been calling BS, for lack of a more appropriate term, on that refrain for a while now. And the movement of open access, which we champion, by the way, so let's not pretend that we aren't happy about having, muddied our own waters, has made it so that quality scholarship not only is available out on the open web, sometimes it's not even in the library collection anymore. So everyone is moving open access in some way or in some model. ACM announced that they're going to be moving to full open access in something like 10 years. IEEE has established a tech version of archive called Tech Archive. So kind of the publishing world is realizing this movement is real. And so we can't really pretend that Google bad, library good anymore. The second intersection was about digital literacies. Students no longer just need to differentiate between a newspaper, trade journal, and academic journal. Now they also need to know the difference between different curators and aggregators. So like the library as a curator, Google Scholar as more of an aggregator, a journal publisher website, a preprint service, an academic social network site, and what rights authors have or don't have in each of those places so that they'll know what they're looking at in each of those places. Like, what do you see when you're looking at something on academia.edu versus what you see when you look at something in the library or Google Scholar. And that's the new digital literacy. It's about licensing, and it's about authors' rights, and it's about contextual publishing. And so I translate this one as I thought .edu meant that it was good. You know, it can be a little confusing. We used to teach .edu is a good thing, but now academia.edu does not mean that it's necessarily a good source. The third intersection between information literacy and scholarly communication is about us. It's about how we need to change ourselves and our way of teaching. You can't check off the boxes of showed library website, discussed why library is better than Google, showed limiter options on library databases. You have to tap into the skills that the students already have to judge authority and help them apply those to the scholarship that's everywhere now. And I call this one competencies can't cut it anymore. And by that, I mean, not just, the ACRL competencies that came before the framework, but our own competencies as well. So jumping into that lecture was kind of meant to give you a context about what I'm talking about. And so now I'll step back a little bit now that you have some of that context and talk about me. So as Margaret said in the opening, I was a public librarian for 12 years, yearning to be the math librarian that I always wanted to be. So the public library where I worked, I was asked to teach information literacy sessions to a local community college that didn't have a physical library. So I was so excited to kind of dabble in academic librarianship. And then later we built a small academic library for a little art school that was across the street. They were starting up a BFA program that was only for like 20 students. And so it's teeny tiny. And so I was really excited to dabble in academic librarianship in a couple of ways. And so I dove into the competencies, which we all used at that time. This was pre-2015. And I applied them with vigor. I didn't have any instruction training, didn't have any assessment training at all. And so it was more of the sage on the stage lecture. Public librarians aren't often the ones who do the presentations whenever they do programming. So when I finally joined academic librarianship 3 or 4 years ago now, I was really eager to update my skills. So I learned about the framework. I actually joined our scholarly communications team, and I helped arrange the roadshow, which those first few slides reference, the ACRL roadshow on the intersections of scholarly communications and information literacy. And in fact, it was just in the first couple of months that I worked here. And so that was like one of my first experiences as an academic librarian, was going to that roadshow. So that's why I jump right on in on that before really even introducing myself, because it was really my first experience. And then one of the first really good faculty relationships I had started with the case study that I'm going to talk about now. It's for a writing intense computer ethics class. It's a 2000 level class. The faculty member at that time assigned 3 papers throughout the semester, and each of those papers required 5 to 7 sources. So you don't see that a lot in computer science. And actually, she doesn't do 3 papers anymore. But she didn't have a chance to bring me into the class until mid-semester, and the students had already written one of their papers. And so I thought, I was researching assessment at that time, and I thought it'd be really interesting to look at the quality of their sources before I talked to them, since they had already turned in a paper, and then judge the quality of sources after I talked to them. So this is how I got my hands on the sources for 35 students before they had ever talked to a librarian. So I started sorting through those sources really to see what kind of rubric I could either adopt, adapt, or create to judge them. But in the first couple of papers, I found something questionable. And a deep dive into the sources revealed that among the 35 papers, the students had encountered 3 types of ScholComm issues. Number one, there were 2 very blatantly predatory publications. And I got really excited with alliteration in this slide, so I apologize for all of these. And so predatory publications, pretend peer review, not really peer-reviewed sources. And then the second type of scholarly communication issue I came up with were preprints and postprints with wrong citations. And so I think maybe Google Scholar and its algorithm was raising up SSRN at that time. because I actually reconstructed some of the searches the students did, and you always got SSRN sources like right up at the top. And so a lot of them were citing SSRN journal or journal of the SSRN or something like that. But actually, when you find the source on SSRN, it gives you the correct citation, which was the journal that the preprint or postprint that you're looking at was actually published in. The third type of SCHOLCOMM issue I encountered was a pretend preprint. And so there was actually only one of these, but it was a pretend preprint. It was, I think it was on SSRN, or might have been another source like academia.edu, one of those academic social networks where academics connect to each other and post their PDFs. It purported to be published in a very prestigious journal. If I recall correctly, I think it was Duke Law Journal or something like that. But it was very, very poorly written. And when I went to the journal's website itself, I was not at all surprised to find that it had not really been published. So there were 3 types of scholarly communication issues that I saw in the 35 papers. And like I said, there were about 5 to 7 sources for each paper. So I designed a lecture and activity that tied into that first intersection about economy. I thought this is a problem. You know, these students are encountering these problems in the intersection of scholarly communications and information literacy. I had fairly recently attended that roadshow, so I was really excited to get started. When I went to the session, I asked the students, how many of you have had a session in the library before? And literally 0 of them raised their hands. I've actually found that surprising in the moment, because we require all second semester English classes to attend a library instruction session. And so this computer science class was sophomore level. So theoretically, they should have had it. I followed up with how many of you took English 1320 here, and again, no hands were raised. And so that was that second semester English class. I didn't follow that up to ask if they transferred over from somewhere else, got AP credit, clept out, or were they saving their humanities till the end of college, which is actually something I did. But I imagine it's not too uncommon with STEM students that when they present to us in a class, they haven't gotten those basic information literacy that a lot of students get in an early humanities class. And when I've talked to my peers here at Texas State, they seem to find the same thing as well. So back to designing the intervention, I like to say I believe in the constructivist theory of learning, that students bring their knowledges and experiences with them, and you leverage those as you work with them to create new knowledge through new experiences. So I tried to draw on their knowledge by analogizing the economics of academic publishing to everyday life. So when something costs money, but it's a desirable or required thing, for example, Super Bowl tickets, there will be folks out there looking to make a buck. I spoke about the tenure system, open access publishing, APCs, and probably way too much for a sophomore level one-shot. I wanted to spend 5 to 10 minutes, and I wound up spending 20 to 30, really. I got excited because they were interested in what I was talking about. Like clearly it was kind of a back and forth, which is exciting. But it really got off tracks. We did an activity where we reviewed an omics paper. Omics is a well-known predatory publisher. The FTC won a $50 million lawsuit for deceptive publishing. When we reviewed the paper, I didn't control the conversation very well, and it took a lot more time than I intended. So hold on just a second.
I'm done watching PJ Masks.
Okay, I can help you in just a minute. Okay. Sorry about that. My 4-year-old is here with me. So like I said, we did an activity where we reviewed an omics paper. I didn't control that conversation very well either. It took more time than I intended, and I didn't get to spend enough time in the rest of the session because it was a one-shot. You know, just like a lot of the information literacy sessions that we all have, it was just a one-shot. And so ultimately, in the rest of the one-shot, I was forced to rely on that Google Bad Library Good brand. More of a Google has bad stuff mixed in with the good stuff, and judging quality can be kind of hard, but still ultimately wasn't getting what I wanted out of raising their competency levels. I did have a student that challenged that the predatory paper that I showed them looked fine. And, you know, maybe they had a point. Like I said, my focus was on predators bad or whatever, but that doesn't mean that the scholarship was bad. That was his point, and he was absolutely right. Really, just because the author submitted it to a bad journal doesn't mean that the article itself is bad. And in that first section, I didn't really have a great answer to his challenge. Yes.
I need a tissue.
Okay, go ahead and get one. In future sessions, I focused less on the economic system as a whole. I spoke either about, you know, promotion and tenure or about open access mandates as a reason for that economy, but it didn't talk about the whole thing. We don't really have time, and I also know we can't simplify the concept too much or they're not going to listen. So it's a balance. I want them to understand the context, and I don't want to simplify things to just Google bad, library good. But, you know, we also don't have a whole lot of time in a one shot. However, you know, I'm turning 40 this month, and as a 40-year-old, I don't like being spoken to like a kindergartner or a 4-year-old. And I know my tolerance was even lower back when I was 20. So I really try and leverage their knowledge and acknowledge that. So where I'm at now, I taught this class last week, in fact, last Tuesday, so right at a week ago. Now I'm more at Google Mixed, library more efficient. to try and make humor out of it. And so here's why. Now I talk about the open access movement and how this is a really great thing, about where it's going, where it's coming from. It comes from a really great place, but it means you're not always seeing the best peer review that you need for this class. And later in your career, you'll be able to do more digging on authority. But for now, it's nice to have a more trustworthy place that will save your time, such as the library. So only about a third of the students when I present to these classes say that they use Google Scholar already. And some of them are actually really legitimately interested when they hear about Google Scholar and what it is. And so I also describe to them what you find on Google Scholar. I focus on what you find there. I talk about the process of publishing and peer review. It's almost like going back to basics, because the real problem behind finding and using preprints or academic social networks is that peer review isn't always applied.
I need to go potty.
Okay, just a moment. I talk about how authors may have to pay many times for an open access version of an article. I talk about that they have to pay for something means that there are fakes out there that pretend to provide peer review, but they don't really do it. I actually tell them how in a previous section of this class, where there were 35 students with 5 to 7 sources each, that's a lot of sources, and there were 2 predatory publications in that mix. And so it's not super common, but it's out there. And then within that, we talk about preprints and how those are probably, you know, real sources, maybe to real peer-reviewed journals, but the piece that you're finding on SSRN or academia.edu or in a university repository may not be the peer-reviewed version. And I am able to fit that into 5 minutes. I talk also, if you use these, how do you cite them? And I'm actually starting to wonder now, and maybe some of you all have the answers. And so this is going to be a question that can maybe start our discussion or our conversation. Is I've always heard that you should use the citation of where this article was ultimately published. And SSRN and academia.edu, they all give you that information. This is where the article itself was published. But shouldn't you list if you accessed it from somewhere else? After all, the article that you accessed and used as a reference may not be a final peer-reviewed journal, may not be the final peer-reviewed version. So there could be some major changes from what you use versus what was in the journal. So that's where I'm at now. That's where I came from and kind of the context that I situated it in. And so I'd like to open it up now. That's my short talk. And I'm sorry for our very adorable interruption. I don't know if you guys are able to see her. My daughter's been over here asking me questions. I had a couple of icebreakers too. So that was one of my questions about citation for preprints. And then I had a couple, icebreaker questions also in case nobody else had a question to get us started. So I will open it up for chat. Oh no, I'm looking in the humorous comments on there about all the Margaret Phillipses we have. I love it.
Yes, so please contribute any questions or comments you might have and include your name if you don't want to be anonymous in the chat. Oh yeah, so we have one comment here. This is why AP should not have dropped the retrieve from in 7. Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Okay, so this one came to just panelists, so I'm going to read it out loud since not everybody saw it. Wondering what you think about integrating open access discovery tools like Unpaywall into library catalogs. Does this muddy the waters a lot for undergraduate students? And so has anybody, I didn't even know you could integrate Unpaywall into the library catalog. I actually really love that idea. I use Unpaywall on my work computer, even though I'm networked, hardwired networked into the library so that everything comes up for me automatically. If I get that little green unlocked button on the side, then that's the link that I'm going to give somebody in an Ask a Librarian chat or in a Ask a Librarian email so that they can access it later. Does anybody else have experience with that? Oh, somebody says you can configure Unpaywall to exclude academic social networks and preprint content, and I didn't know that. Somebody named Beth up there said, I mentioned Google Scholar, but discuss Big Google more because that's where they tend to go. They have freshman information literacy before they see me. I'm not yet privy to their citations. You're definitely right about them using Big Google more. Like I said, I ask before my session who knows about Google Scholar and who uses Google, and it's definitely about 1/3 Google Scholar and about 2/3 just use like regular Google search. Oh, PD says, all the professors want me to start at Google Scholar, but they struggle to see, it's where all the professors want me to start, but they struggle to see it as an expert level tool. No, yeah, that's great. I love that. I have a faculty member who does not want me to show library databases, only wants me to show Google Scholar and ACM and IEEE. So ACM and IEEE as well, but not, our discovery layer. Oh, I like, Suzanne wrote to just panelists, I always start with Google Scholar search and then follow up with disciplinary databases so students can see the differences. I like that.
I also like to talk about, how Google Scholar interacts with our library databases, right? And that's one of the reasons it's working for them to retrieve these scholarly articles.
Thank you. You're right. I actually tend to forget about that. I have it on my computer and I tend to forget to talk about how to integrate that. But I like that. That is a good acknowledgement of reality also. I mean, I use it as a search tool sometimes. And so I like that. From the real Margaret.
Yeah, the moderator, Margaret. I work largely with engineering students, and I tend to also talk about the economics of publishing in general, because one of the main things, especially like senior capstone students need to use for their work is standards like ISO or ASTM, type standards. And those definitely have a publishing and economic model of their own, but it's not the same as like scholarly publishing.
Okay, I have to step away for a minute. I'll be back in just a moment.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point, Nathan, that Google Scholar might have access to OA that some proprietary databases do not, for sure. I like that, Nina, the comment about teaching a session where you kind of compare and contrast to the information literacy concepts in Google and the same concepts in library databases. I'd be curious to know what type of class you were working with for that program. Oh, it was English. Okay, great. Yeah, I wonder how that would work in the STEM environment too. That would be really interesting to do. Yeah, I think that's a great point to talk about Google Scholar from the standpoint of, where a place to go to look for information once you graduate, when you might not have the privilege to access databases anymore, at least through your institution, depending on what organizations or other communities you might be connected with. Yeah, I tend to come across some publications that kind of muddy the waters for me, as well. And this comes about with me not so much with undergraduate students, but maybe working with graduate students. So maybe some publications that don't exactly seem predatory, perhaps they're indexed, places like Scopus or PubMed, but they just seem much more questionable than other publications. And so when questions come up about, what do you think about using this, or what do you think about publishing in this place, does anyone else come across those situations? No, maybe not so much. Yeah, someone did come across those situations in relation to preprint servers. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. They can claim it's submitted to any journal. Yeah, that's interesting that they're able to edit the records, right? Yeah, I know here at Purdue, and Nina can speak to this too, but we have several schools that are also very concerned about avoiding predatory publishers among faculty and graduate students, and we're asked to deliver several programs on that on campus.
I have a faculty member in the College of Business who is working with Cabell's to get the full blacklist because he wants to compare the annual publications from the college to the blacklist. And they provide that. They charge for it now.
Right.
But you can get that. It's interesting. It's an interesting project.
It's kind of like interesting and kind of scary to dive down, right?
And so, okay, oh, where did that go? I lost the conversation I was about to cover. Here we go. From Nina. I always advise to judge the work of the research itself rather than solely judging on publisher and journal. That's true, but that's good for the conversation about faculty publishing, but not necessarily about undergraduates who are finding research for their work.
Yeah, it definitely leads to the discussions of these are very gray areas sometimes, right? I think there was some earlier comments about students getting information literacy, before they meet with you in STEM related courses. And, some of us have experienced some of that, but I think some of the transferability from what they learn in those sessions doesn't always port over, into the STEM environment either.
That's true. I'm curious if anybody has done the same kind of informal survey that I've done, asking people when you meet with your undergraduate STEM classes, asking them how many of you have been to the library before for one of these sessions. Have y'all done that kind of an informal survey? I'm curious if it's just our environment or if it's fairly common with STEM students that they haven't come to the library before they meet in their first STEM library class.
So Christine says she does that. What do you find out, Christine? Do they usually have some exposure prior to or no? Yeah, I think it's a mixed bag too in my experience.
Yeah. Somebody else is saying it's a mixed bag as well.
Yeah, it's really difficult. It makes it really difficult to analyze your audience, right? Because they're kind of all over the place with their experiences.
Blank looks, love that, Beth. We're all familiar with the blank stare. Of course, orientation. I kind of feel like a lot of them don't remember their orientation though. I mean, so we do an orientation here too, and they all come into the library for a brief, it's different every year, but it's usually something like a short scavenger hunt or a little adventure that they do. And by the time I meet with them a couple of, maybe 1 or 2 years later in their first kind of STEM-based class that comes into the library, they usually don't remember that.
Yeah, I think there's quite a bit of literature out there about the transferability of these skills to new situations is actually a lot lower than you would like anticipate.
Mm.
And orientations are always so crazy, right? Like there's so much going on during their move-in week. Yeah, as Christine was mentioning, they don't even get time for an orientation anymore. We don't truly at Purdue either.
Yeah, I think we get 5 or 10 minutes of a talk, and then later for a brief, it's usually a game or a scavenger hunt or I think we've used Adventure for a facilitated scavenger hunt.
It's great to see, Nathan, that you're seeing more of a use.
Mm-hmm. So PD mentioned earlier in the chat about how that they've encountered people claiming an essay or something is submitted to any journal they want. Since they can mention the journal, it can get posted to something like Archive or another preprint or academic social network. And I wonder if anybody, it was a lot of work for me to investigate the citations for all 35 papers. And like I said, so it's 5 to 7 sources per paper. And to discover something like that, I have to take it from the citation, look for the site. I usually start with looking for the citation in the library database. And if it's not there, then going to Google Scholar and then actually going and looking at the record and seeing, okay, is this a journal that the library even has? And then going and looking in go dive into the journal itself and go, okay, why didn't I find this when I searched in the library? It was actually quite a lot of work discovering those issues. I wonder if anybody else has ever gone through that type of experience. The professor did ask me to do that review on the final paper that year, and she really found the feedback really helpful for the students. And then the next semester I did it. She had 3 sections of 35 students that year. And then after that, I gave her my rubric and started training her grader to do it. So she still gets the benefit, but I don't have to do the work for over 100 students. It was a lot of work.
Was she surprised, initially?
So yes and no. I think that at first she was kind of happy that her students use Google Scholar. She's an adjunct remote professor. So she's not on campus a lot, and she's actually one of those who prefers if the students use open access, but she doesn't, she understands it's important to learn about peer review, and it's important to, that you situate this information literacy conversation at the library for a reason. And so she doesn't insert her opinion until later, but I think she started our relationship with that bias against library sources, just because there's the extra step of having to log in for her because she's remote and adjunct. Mm-hmm. And so I think she was a little happy that they usually used stuff off of Google Scholar. But then once I did the talk to the students, I think she started learning about some of these issues. And then she really saw the benefit of the review that I provided, the education I provided, and then the feedback I provided. And I think she thought, at least in the beginning, it was something that that type of feedback she couldn't provide herself. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's become a really good relationship, and I'm excited to work with her every semester. And yeah, I'm also very happy that now a grader is doing the application.
Could definitely be a lot of work.
Sorry, I'm laughing at Nathan's comment. Why haven't you guys figured out how to search all those databases all at once? Superhero magic librarian should be on all of our business cards. Oh, wow. I like Nathan's comment,
Mm.
reviewing the annotated bibs and reference lists after library sessions. That's a really great way to do assessment. Even among very devoted undergrads, 30 to 50% are questionable. It was nice when that class had 3 papers. And so that semester I came in after the first one. And then the next semester, she still had 3 papers. I still only was able to be brought in for one shot, but after each paper, she sent me the references and I was able to give them some feedback. And I felt like, so Nathan mentions good follow-up discussions and personal evaluation mentoring. I felt like I at least got some virtual mentoring or some virtual consultations in with those students when I was able to give them feedback about the sources they used. And so it was almost like I came in from, I was able to build up the competency level a little bit more, almost like having a second shot at the class.
From my experience, I think students really value that individual, kind of feedback and what they've selected.
I do wish I could leverage this kind of faculty relationship in a class like this with STEM classes that don't have that have research projects that aren't this kind of humanities like paper type project. I have a lot of classes that produce writing and use research to produce that writing. So technical writing or research posters, a lot of research poster projects, of course. And I don't get to work with those classes as often. And I wish I could leverage this type of relationship to working more in depth with those classes.
What do you think, Diana, you might do? Was there anything you think you might do differently, if you had that type of opportunity?
So I've been trying. I work with a couple of summer undergraduate research experience groups in computer science. And each summer, so I've only been here 3 years. And so it's been, and I've only worked with them, I guess, 3 summers now. Each summer I try something new. And I get to work with them 3 times. I come in at the beginning for the one-shot style session. And then I come in and talk to them about citation management. And then I get to come in and help judge their posters, but I never see the follow through on the posters. And so each year I try something new in incorporating what I teach at the beginning into conversations that I have with the students throughout the year, throughout the summer research experience. I still haven't seen a lot of, going to the poster conference and seeing some great citations on the posters. At least half the posters still have 0 citations on them.
Yeah, that is a great audience though for this type of conversation, right? Those that are engaged in those summer undergraduate research programs. So that's a great opportunity.
Oh, so Nathan says in bio and chem, we do that by accompanying scholarly searches with lab projects throughout the semester. 2 to 3 scholarly papers related to each step of a lab experiment. That's really good. I don't work with bio and chem. I work with math, computer science, and CIS. So that's a neat. I might talk to one of my faculty about that kind of model. I like that.
Yeah, I have extensive opportunities to work with engineering undergraduate students, but the sources of evidence they need are not always these scholarly publications. I mean, it is to some extent, but just as much they need things like patents and standards or, other types of reports, white papers, web sources of information. So it doesn't always lend itself to that that scholarly communication and, intersection.
Nathan mentions in response to Christine, talking about mixing science writing with popular magazine. And the class that I'm talking about here, she does actually encourage her students, because this is a computer ethics class. There's a lot of good ethics conversation that goes on in popular writing, PC Magazine and New York Times, everywhere. They're talking about issues like the privacy issues around self-driving cars or diabetes self-monitoring technology. And so that's out there in the popular sphere as well. So she actually encourages them to mix research with popular writing, to talk again about the value of each kind of discussion mode. I like that. Mm-hmm. I like this comment that it's important to mention there are masses friendly sources that are still based on scholarly sources. We had a faculty member who actually requested an entire LibGuide be devoted to, oh boy, I'm going to forget the name of it, popular scholarly sources, or sources that are research-based but are written in plain language. Her favorite one was called the Conversation. I remember that. It's a research-based website that academics publish in, but it's written in plain language and meant for anybody to read. And we did an entire, this was actually to faculty, to promote this kind of scholarly communication at the faculty level.
I love that, in thinking about undergraduate students, thinking how much more accessible, it makes that scholarly communication to them.
Mm-hmm. I love our,
Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead, Diana.
I was going to say, I really love our conversation. I feel like if we had had this kind of conversation 5 years ago, I think a lot of us probably, and myself included, would have been on the Google Bad Library Good train. And we're not. Like, we're kind of flipping that on its head. And we're talking about incorporating on paywall. And we're talking about science communication and really loving these masses friendly sources and these plain language sources. I like how our conversation is so much different than it would have been in the past.
Definitely. I started thinking about, so I don't know if some of you out there have read the kind of recommended pre-reading, if you had an opportunity to do that Diana had mentioned for this talk, called Incorporating Scholarly Communications Topics into Information Literacy Instruction for Undergraduates by Madeline Gerbig in the iJournal. I liked one of the points that was made in there when she was recapping a study done by Reel and Hensley about that the majority of students that they surveyed in their study didn't perceive the library as the place to learn about these topics, which is interesting. And I think could use more examination, right?
I don't think people think about the library being the place to learn about how information's created. I think they think about the library in terms of finding information and getting the library to buy information they need, but not to go there to learn how information is created, and then taking that extra step to say, okay, that the process of that information creation affects the output and therefore affects how I would use it. There's a breadcrumb trail there, which is the reason why you'd come to the library to learn about that. But yeah, you have to start by coming.
It's very interesting.
Stump the librarian. I love that. I was doing a faculty development yesterday, and I was a part of a 3-person panel, and one of the other 3 people shared a statistical claim. And somebody in chat asked for the reference, and I was like, oh man, I wish I wasn't a panelist. I would be on that. I'd be finding that reference. I like that, PD. I'm reading that as if you're like triumphantly raising your hand as you say that sentence. Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, we still have oh, here we go. So looks like a couple of you have been trying to incorporate the framework into some of your workshops. That's great. You give an example, Christine, of how you're doing that? Like what type of workshops?
I used to always say that while Christine's thinking and maybe responding to that, I used to always say that scholarship is conversation was my favorite frame. But as I've been incorporating more scholarly communications into my information literacy, I think information creation as a process is kind of morphed into maybe my favorite frame in terms of what I feel resonates with me and what I'm teaching maybe more often. Has a lot of translation and practical applications.
So we have a few minutes left here for the discussion. So if you have any other questions or comments, feel free to go ahead and contribute those. And I'm going to go ahead and remind everyone where you can find the archive for this discussion. And for the past discussions that the STSIL committee has held. They're on this LibGuide. And then if you are interested in hosting and being a discussion leader for, a STEM IL topic, we encourage you to contact us. You could contact really any member of the Information Literacy Committee for STS. Here's my email address. You can always contact me. We welcome your participation. It's kind of a great way to maybe informally maybe get out some ideas that you have maybe before you publish or present those in a conference.
I like that process-oriented approach, Nathan. That's good. I love that process-oriented approach to the framework. That's really good. Going from one frame to the next seems this seems like a really natural way to learn it. I think that's good. I don't think that would bore anybody to tears. I mean, I feel like I think it's really important to tell them about the mechanics of a database, even in a freshman level one shot, because they need to know what they're finding, especially when they go further along in their career. They're going to learn about individual databases. And if they can situate that in what they learned about how the discovery system works, your swoop search or your primo, about if they can situate their learning about disciplinary databases and learning about the mechanics of that, I think you're doing them a big favor, doing the future learners a big favor.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a great thing for them to be hearing, even as first year, early undergraduates. And, I found a lot of even graduate students or faculties don't really understand, some of those nuances, the differences, right, between publisher databases, index and abstracting databases, the different mechanics of how things work.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, why they should use both the discovery layer and specific databases. Absolutely. Well, it looks like we're getting about to the end of our time here. So it's been a really great discussion. Thank you everyone for, coming and participating. And we really hope that you are able to participate in the future discussions that we're able to hold this year. And again, please feel free to visit this chat guide. I'll put it one more time here in the chat if you want to archive or visit the archive from this session. And a special thanks to Dianna for your willingness to lead this discussion and give us your time today. It was great.
Thank you all.
And